The training hall smelled like overconfidence and poor life choices, I should know. I had been standing in places like this for 12 cycles, watching recruits from 73 different species attempt to prove themselves worthy of the Galactic Defense Initiative. Most failed. Some spectacularly, but none, absolutely none, had ever walked in carrying a sword. My name is Vorath, and I am what the humans would call a weapons master, though that term hardly captures the 17 years I spent studying every form of combat technology known to civilized space. I have trained Krell warriors who could punch through battle plating. I have instructed Silith marksmen who could hit a target from 3 kilometers in a sandstorm. I have seen things that would make your combat instructor weep into their nutrition paste, and yet, here I was, staring at a human who looked like he had raided a museum. Name, I barked, my vocal translator catching the edge of irritation in my throat sacs. Matthias Kane, the human said, adjusting the blade strapped across his back like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair that clearly had never met military regulation, and eyes that held an unsettling combination of amusement and absolute certainty. The other instructors, Kelvin from Proxima Station and Thora, a Venturi combat specialist, were already smirking. I could see it in the way their head crests flattened. They thought this would be entertaining. They were right, but not in the way they expected. And that? I pointed one of my 4 arms at the weapon, the gesture dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for faulty equipment and cold rations. This? Oh, this is just my sword. Matthias patted the handle like it was a pet. Standard earth steel. Folded. Tempered. Sharp enough to shave with, though I don't recommend it. Kelvin actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed through the training hall like a malfunctioning air recycler. A sword, I repeated slowly, tasting each syllable like spoiled protein. You brought a sword to an interstellar military academy. Well, technically, I brought 2, Matthias said, and I noticed for the first time the shorter blade at his hip. But who's counting? Thora stepped forward, her scales rippling with barely contained mirth. Human, do you understand where you are? This is not some primitive combat arena. We fight with plasma rifles, neural disruptors, and graviton cannons. We engage enemies at ranges measured in kilometers, sometimes from orbit. Your little metal stick is about as useful as bringing a rock to a fleet battle. Funny you should mention rocks, Matthias said, his mouth curving into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so sharp. We started with those too. Worked pretty well for a few million years. I felt my head tendrils twitch, a sure sign my patience was evaporating faster than water on a desert moon. Right. Fine. You want to play with antiques? Let's see what your precious blade can do against real military hardware. I gestured to the equipment racks lining the walls, each one loaded with enough firepower to level a small building. Choose any weapon from this facility. Show me your sword can match it. When you fail, and you will fail, you will leave that toy in storage and learn to fight like an actual soldier. The other recruits, about 20 of them from various species, had stopped their drills to watch. I could see the mixture of confusion and second-hand embarrassment radiating from them like heat from a reactor core. Matthias tilted his head, considering the racks of weapons with the kind of casual interest someone might show a food dispensary menu. Any weapon, he asked. Any weapon, I confirmed. And if I win? You won't. But if I do? I spread all 4 arms in a gesture of absolute certainty. If your primitive blade can somehow match the performance of our advanced technology, I will personally apologize to every human in this facility and admit that perhaps, just perhaps, I do not know everything about combat. That got a few gasps from the crowd. Vorath admitting fault? It would be like watching a star go supernova, rare, spectacular, and probably a sign that something had gone horribly wrong with the universe. Matthias walked to the weapons rack, his boots making soft sounds on the training mat. He ran his fingers along several options. A plasma caster that could melt through ship hull. A kinetic accelerator that could punch holes in reinforced concrete. A neural stunner that could drop a charging Krell in its tracks. He selected a standard-issue combat shield. Mk7 model. Composite alloy. Rated to withstand repeated plasma strikes, kinetic impacts up to 3,000 joules, and even limited explosive damage. This'll do, he said, tossing the shield to Kelvin. Hold this. Kelvin caught it, confusion spreading across his features like oil on water. What am I supposed to do with this? Just hold it. Keep it steady. Matthias drew his sword with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. The blade caught the overhead lights, throwing sharp reflections across the training hall. I'm going to write my name on it. I blinked. All 3 of my eyes. You're going to what? Write my name. On the shield. With my sword. He spoke slowly, like explaining quantum mechanics to a child. Without putting a scratch on Kelvin. Without damaging the shield's structural integrity. Just carving my name into the surface layer. That's impossible, Thora said flatly. The tolerances required, the precision, the control. Even with a plasma cutter set to minimum dispersion, you would risk creating microfractures that could compromise the entire shield matrix. And you want to do it with a sharpened piece of metal? Yep. While being held by someone whose survival instincts will make them flinch? Yep. You're insane, I said. It wasn't an insult. It was a medical diagnosis, Matthias shrugged. I'm human. We have a long and distinguished history of being told something's impossible right before we do it anyway. Ask the Krell about the Battle of Titan Station. Or the Silith about atmospheric combat. Or pretty much anyone about how we went from banging rocks together to building faster-than-light drives in less than 10,000 years. He had a point. A stupid, reckless, entirely human point. Kelvin, I said, my voice taking on the tone of official responsibility. You don't have to do this. If the human scrapes that blade across your arm while trying to show off, you'll need medical attention, and I'll need to file 17 different incident reports. Kelvin looked at the shield, then at Matthias, then at the sword. His crest flattened completely, a sign of either determination or resignation. Possibly both. I'll do it, he said. But if you cut me, human, I'm going to beat you unconscious with this shield and use your sword to open ration packs. Deal, Matthias said cheerfully. The crowd pressed closer. Even the recruits who had been pretending not to watch were now fully invested in whatever was about to happen. I saw credits changing hands. Apparently, some of them were already betting on the outcome. The odds heavily favored catastrophic failure and possible dismemberment. Kelvin held the shield at chest height, arms extended, trying very hard to keep everything steady despite the fact that his species evolved on a high-gravity world and steady was not really in their nature. Matthias approached slowly, sword held in a grip that looked almost relaxed. Too relaxed. Like he was holding a pen instead of a weapon that could separate Kelvin's arm from his body with one poorly angled strike. Ready? He asked. No, Kelvin said honestly. Perfect. The blade moved. I have watched countless combat engagements. I have seen professional duelists, master swordsmen from species that still used bladed weapons for ceremonial purposes, and even participated in historical weapon demonstrations. I thought I understood what skill looked like. I was wrong. The sword didn't hack or slash. It danced. The tip touched the shield surface with pressure so precise that I couldn't hear the contact, couldn't see any resistance, couldn't detect any vibration through the air. Matthias's hand moved in small, controlled gestures, each one flowing into the next like he was painting instead of carving. The shield was rated to resist plasma fire. The molecular bonding in the composite alloy was designed to distribute impact force across the entire surface area, making it nearly impossible to create localized damage without specialized tools, and yet, a thin line appeared in the shield's dark surface. Then another. And another. Matthias was writing. My translator struggled to process what I was seeing because what I was seeing violated several basic principles of material science and common sense. The blade was somehow shaving away microscopic layers of the composite without triggering the shield's stress response, without creating heat friction that would show up on thermal sensors, without making Kelvin's arms shake from sympathetic vibration. Kelvin's eyes had gone very wide. He was barely breathing, frozen in place like a statue while a human with a primitive weapon did something that should require a precision laser and a laboratory setting. The first letter took shape, M, then A, then T. He's actually doing it, Thora whispered, her scales shifting through colors that indicated profound confusion. That's not possible, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Tell that to the shield, one of the recruits muttered. The crowd was silent now except for breathing. Even the ventilation system seemed to have gotten quieter, as if the station itself wanted to watch. THIAS, Matthias finished the last letter with a small flourish, a curve at the bottom of the S that was entirely unnecessary and completely perfect. He stepped back, sliding the sword into its sheath with the kind of casual grace that suggested he could do all of this blindfolded, underwater, while solving complex mathematics problems. There we go, he said. One name. As requested. Kelvin lowered the shield slowly, staring at his arms like he couldn't quite believe they were still attached. They were. Not a scratch. Not even a mark where the blade had passed within millimeters of his skin. I took the shield from him with two of my hands, turning it to catch the light. Matthias. Carved into military-grade composite alloy with what these so-called advanced species considered a primitive weapon. The letters were clean, even, perfectly legible. The depth was uniform. The shield's structural integrity readings. I checked my diagnostic tablet, were unchanged. No microfractures. No stress points. No damage except for the deliberate removal of surface material. It was impossible. It had happened anyway. Well? Matthias asked, and I detected something dangerous in his voice now. Not aggression. Not arrogance. Just certainty. The kind of certainty that came from knowing exactly what he was capable of, and knowing that everyone watching had just learned the same lesson. The silence in the training hall was the kind you could bottle and sell as a weapon. Stared at the shield. Then at Matthias. Then back at the shield, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense according to the laws of physics I had spent 2 decades studying. They didn't. I started, then stopped. Words, which usually came to me with the precision of a targeted missile strike, had suddenly decided to go on vacation. That should not have been possible. And yet. Matthias gestured at the shield with one hand, his expression somewhere between polite and insufferably smug. Thora picked up the shield, running her clawed fingers over the carved letters like she was reading ancient texts. The pressure required to cut composite alloy, even at surface level, should have been enough to trigger the molecular bonding response. The shield should have hardened against the intrusion. Instead, it just let him carve it like soft clay. It is not soft clay, I said, perhaps more defensively than necessary. It is military-grade protection rated for active combat situations. Kelvin corrected, rubbing his arms even though they were perfectly fine. Now it is military-grade protection with some human's name carved into it. Which, and I cannot stress this enough, I did not think was going to happen without me losing at least one limb. The recruits were muttering among themselves now, the sound building like pressure in a failing containment field. I could hear fragments of conversation drifting through my translator. Did you see how steady his hand was? I lost 50 credits on that bet. My combat instructor back home said humans were just loud and stubborn. Apparently they are also terrifying. I held up one hand, demanding silence. The hall obeyed, mostly because everyone wanted to hear what I was going to say next. Honestly, I wanted to hear what I was going to say next, because I had no idea how to process what had just occurred. Fine, I said, the word tasting like defeat mixed with military rations. You have demonstrated exceptional blade control. Congratulations. You can carve your name into things. Very useful for defacing property and absolutely nothing else in modern combat. Matthias raised one eyebrow. Humans only had 2 of those, which seemed like a design flaw, but the expression was still remarkably effective at conveying skepticism. Nothing else, he repeated. Nothing else. I emphasized each word like I was explaining orbital mechanics to a particularly slow navigation computer. We do not engage in melee combat. We fight at range. With weapons that can eliminate targets before they even know we are present. Your skill with a blade is impressive in the same way that being able to juggle rocks is impressive. Entertaining, perhaps. Practically useful? No. So you are saying, Matthias said slowly, walking toward the weapons rack again, that close-quarters combat is irrelevant in modern warfare? I am saying it is rare. And when it happens, we have far better tools than sharpened metal. I gestured toward the rack where combat batons, neural disruptors, and plasma daggers hung in neat rows. Tools designed specifically for that purpose. Right. Tools. Matthias selected a plasma dagger, the kind that could cut through reinforced doors and cauterize wounds simultaneously. Standard issue for breach teams and close protection details. Like this one. Exactly like that one. He activated it. The blade hummed to life, glowing with contained energy that would turn most organic matter into charcoal on contact. Then he deactivated it, set it back on the rack, and drew his sword again. Here is what I think, he said, and his voice had lost all trace of humor now. I think you have spent so much time with your advanced technology that you have forgotten something important. Something that every human child learns before they are old enough to join the military. And what is that? I asked, feeling my patience approaching critical levels. That technology fails. He said it simply, like stating that water was wet or that vacuum was generally bad for breathing. Your plasma weapons need power cells, he continued, starting to walk in a slow circle around the training mat. Your kinetic accelerators need ammunition. Your neural disruptors need calibration and clear line of sight. Your shields need generators. Everything you rely on needs something else to function. And when it does not function, when the power runs out or the circuits fry or the targeting system crashes, you are standing there holding an expensive piece of junk. That is why we have backup systems, Thora interjected. Redundancies. Fail-safes. Which also fail, Matthias said. Given enough time and enough pressure, everything fails. Except this. He held up the sword. This is a piece of metal with an edge. It does not need charging. It does not need calibration. It does not care if there is an electromagnetic pulse or a solar flare or a power failure. It works because physics works. And physics is remarkably consistent. One of the recruits, a young Turellian whose name I could not remember, raised a tentacle. But Instructor Vorath is correct. Modern combat happens at range. When would you ever be close enough to use that weapon? When something goes wrong, Matthias said immediately. And on the battlefield, something always goes wrong. Your transport crashes. Your position gets overrun. Your supply lines get cut. Your communications fail. And suddenly you are not fighting at 3 kilometers with a sniper rifle. You are fighting at 3 meters with whatever you have left. And I promise you, when that happens, you want something that works. He moved suddenly, faster than I expected. The sword left its sheath and cut through the air in a strike that would have taken my head off if I had been standing 2 steps closer. The blade stopped exactly where he intended it to stop, held perfectly still in a guard position that looked like it had been carved from stone. You want to know why humans still train with blades, he asked, and now there was an edge to his voice sharper than any weapon. Because we remember. We remember when the fleet at Proxima got hit with that cascade virus and every plasma weapon on every ship turned into dead weight. We remember when the ground forces on Kepler got caught in an ion storm and all their fancy technology stopped working. We remember the boarding action on the Avalon where crew members were beating back hostiles with whatever they could grab because their guns were bricked by hostile electronic warfare. The training hall was silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. Not shock. Not disbelief. Something closer to understanding, creeping through the assembled recruits like dawn across a dark planet. I can teach you to use energy weapons, I said quietly. And I will. Because they are effective tools when they function correctly. And I can teach you this, Matthias said, lowering the sword. Because when everything else fails, when the technology betrays you and the situation deteriorates beyond all acceptable parameters, you need to know that you can still fight. You need to know that you are not helpless. You need to know that with nothing but a piece of sharpened metal and the skills in your head, you can still protect yourself and the people depending on you. Kelvin was nodding slowly. So was Thora. Even some of the recruits looked thoughtful instead of confused. I felt something shift in my understanding, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of my certainty. It was uncomfortable. I did not like it. But I could not deny what I had seen or the logic behind his words. You said you could teach, I said carefully. Teaching requires a student who wishes to learn. Why would anyone here want to learn a skill that may never be used? Because warriors do not train for the battles they want to fight, Matthias said. They train for the battles that find them when they are least prepared. And those battles do not care about your preferences or your equipment loadout or your tactical doctrine. They only care about who survives and who does not. He sheathed the sword again, the motion smooth as water flowing downhill. Besides, he added, and the hint of humor crept back into his voice. You made a promise. Something about apologizing to every human in this facility? Oh. Right. That, I felt every eye in the training hall turn toward me. The recruits were watching. The other instructors were watching. Somewhere in the station network, security cameras were watching, which meant people in other sections were probably watching too, have faced down charging warbeasts. I have diffused explosive devices while under fire. I have taught hand-to-hand combat to species that could literally tear me apart without effort. None of that was as difficult as what I was about to do. I straightened all 4 arms, squared my shoulders, and activated my communication implant. Attention all human personnel currently stationed at this facility, I said, feeling each word like a physical weight. This is Instructor Vorath. I am making a facility-wide announcement to inform you that I was incorrect in my assessment of primitive weaponry. Specifically, I failed to recognize that skill and precision can sometimes exceed technological advantage. I apologize for my previous dismissive attitude regarding traditional combat methods. That is all. I closed the channel before anyone could respond. The training hall erupted in noise. Recruits were talking, laughing, arguing about what they had just witnessed. Kelvin was examining the shield again like it might hold answers to questions he had not thought to ask yet. Thora was already pulling up training manuals on her data tablet, probably researching historical combat techniques. Matthias walked over to me, extending one hand in that strange human gesture of respect. That took courage, he said. Admitting you were wrong in front of everyone. I looked at his hand, then at his face, then back at the hand. After a moment, I reached out with one of my own arms and gripped it. His skin was warm, his grip firm but not aggressive. It took evidence, I corrected. I am a combat instructor. My job is to teach people how to survive situations that want them dead. If that means learning from a human with a sword, then that is what I will do. Fair enough. He released my hand and turned toward the assembled recruits. So, who wants to learn why humans are absolutely terrible at accepting the limits of what weapons can do? Every single hand, tentacle, and appendage in the room went up, watched Matthias start organizing the crowd into training groups, explaining basic principles of edge alignment and body mechanics with the same casual competence he had shown while carving his name into composite alloy. The other recruits listened with an attention they rarely showed during standard weapons training, and I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the start: humans did not carry swords because they rejected modern technology. They carried swords because they understood something the rest of us had forgotten, that survival often depends not on having the best tools, but on never forgetting how to fight when those tools fail you. It was a lesson worth learning. Even if it meant admitting I had been wrong, especially because it meant admitting I had been wrong, the training hall slowly returned to organized chaos as Matthias began the first lesson. I stood back and watched, making mental notes about integrating blade work into standard combat curriculum. It would be controversial. Command would probably question my judgment. Let them question. Had seen what was possible when skill met determination, when ancient technique merged with modern understanding. I had watched a human do the impossible with nothing but sharpened metal and absolute confidence, and if there was one thing I had learned in 12 cycles of teaching soldiers how to stay alive, it was this: never ignore a lesson just because it comes from an unexpected source, even if that source carries a sword to a plasma fight and somehow wins anyway.